I'm going to show you the 7 stages of property development. I'm going to show you how you can control property without ever owning it using options. I'll show you how to use my developer's knowledge to make money from property without ever even having to build anything at all. I'll show you how to use vendor finance. This is how to buy property with no deposit. I use this exact strategy in my very first property development deal. I'll then talk about joint ventures, how you can get into property with little or no money at all. Are you watching today wanting to develop cash flow for the rest of your life? Or are you just here because you want big chunks of money coming in, say 150,000 in the next 6 months? Now, do they teach you this at school? Do they even teach it at university? I remember being 22, fresh out of university, and starting a job on a construction site just outside of Brisbane. I was working 50 to 60 hours per week, almost every Saturday, and getting paid $60,000 a year. I looked at my boss, who was 10 years older than me, and my boss's boss, who was 20 years older. And I thought, this is gonna be my life if I don't do something about it. I remember sitting at work and I got an email from my cousin. On my personal email account, I didn't check it that often, but there's one time I checked it, my cousin actually called me and said, "I just sent you an email to this event." It was in the next week, and I remember I used some excuse to get out of work and go to this event. So 3 months after that first ever seminar that I went to, I bought my very first property development. I bought it using creative finance and using none of my own money. It was a $3 million project. It was 2 houses and 3 townhouses on completion. I was 22 doing my first deal, and that was 11 years ago. Today I've got over $200 million in projects in the pipeline. Prior to my first development, I had no property experience, no property knowledge. I just went out there and I did it. I mean, I was terrible. I just started calling agents. I was calling deals that were $500,000 up to 10 million. And when I first started, I could barely even talk to anyone on the phone, let alone negotiate a multi-million dollar property deal. So I believe it's possible for anyone to start in property development. The only thing that matters is that you've really got to have that real passion for property. And you've got to want to change your life. You've got to get out there, be active. It's possible for anyone to make money in property development. It's even possible to make money from property development without ever even building anything. You just need to know the steps and be able to apply the steps. Now think about it, they don't teach you this at school. And most Australians, by the time they get to retirement, do they have large chunks of money coming in? Do they have passive income coming in every single week? They don't. The facts are that most people retire dead or dead broke. 62% of Aussies retire on the pension. And by the time you get to 80, 82% of Australians are on the pension. So let's talk about the money and how to get it. The number 1 industry for millionaires and billionaires is property. And for those that don't make their money in property, they normally put it back into property. Well, what type of property? Do we buy new? Do we buy old? Do we buy a renovation, subdivision, splitter, high-rise, low-rise, commercial, residential? There's just so many choices. And most people at the end of 5 years haven't actually bought anything. Can you relate to this? So let's get rid of all of those choices and go back to basics. I believe there's 2 types of property investments. There's either passive or there's active. I remember looking at investment properties when I was 21 years old and thinking, there's got to be a faster way. I don't want to wait 7 to 10 years and wait for the market to increase. I want to start adding value now. And when I went to that first seminar, I thought, this is great. This is brilliant. I can start adding value to property straight away. So we want to use the skills of a property developer to make money from property development. So you don't actually have to be the property developer at all. Remember, there's 7 stages to property development, and you can make money at any one of the stages. But what you do need to realize is that every product goes through what's called a product cycle. So at the start of the chain, somebody comes up with an idea and they think, I'm going to make that. It gets manufactured in a facility somewhere, and then it gets shipped to the warehouse, and then from the warehouse, it might get shipped to a wholesaler, and the wholesaler to the retailer. Now, at every one of those stages, somebody is getting paid, except at the end where somebody's paying the money. And that person paying the money is paying for everyone else along the product cycle. Now, do you want to be paying the money or making the money? You want to be making the money. Now, in property, it's exactly the same. If you go to a real estate agent and you call them up to buy a property, you're at the end of the product cycle. You're paying the money. Now imagine you and I walk past the exact same property. Who do you call when you see the signboard out the front? You call the real estate agent. Now the real estate agent is the last person to be paid on the product cycle, right? Putting the deal together is the magic in the money. People often think development is all about construction. Construction is only stage 6 of a 7-stage process. You guys want to become the property connector, the deal maker. This is where all the money is made. You don't necessarily have to be the developer and develop it all the way through to completion. You can pick your step on the 7-step process and start making money straight away. So stage 1 is buying, stage 2 is a site analysis, stage 3 is a planning approval followed by the finance, stage 5 is a sales and marketing, stage 6 is the construction, and stage 7 is the completion. So you can pick a stage and really start making money from that stage. To be able to make money from finding a site, you've got to know where to look and you've got to know the language to speak. You can't just go on realestate.com and start looking for properties, or you can't go to the newspaper. That's not how this works. You've got to know the language. One great way to get started in property is actually finding a site for other developers. Every single site that I'm developing currently was found by somebody else. I don't actually have the time to source my own sites, so I rely on other people to bring them to me. This is the land subdivision on the outskirts of Brisbane. This site was actually brought to me by somebody else. I paid him a site finder's fee of $96,800. All he did was bring me the site. He had no money in the deal. He'd only spent maybe a couple of hours on it per week, tops. And after about 6 months, I paid him this amount of money for this site. If you brought me this site, you could do this within a 6-month period quite easily, and I could be paying you $96,800 up front just by finding me this deal. Once we have found the site, now we need to analyze it. So what are we actually going to build on the site? So step 3 is getting the planning approval. Now what the planning approval is you apply to council for a certain use. Your use might be taking one single property into 2 or 3 properties. And council say, sure, no worries, we'll approve that. Once the approval comes through, you've now got a development approval to be able to build something different on the site. And now you've unlocked this potential to be able to do more with the property. Now I'll show you an example. Say you have a block of land and the block of land just has a use for a single house. This block of land is worth $500,000 as is. But imagine you could split it down the middle and create 2 blocks of land. Now the development approval will cost you about $20,000 for a property like this. But the property's no longer worth $500,000. It's now worth $700,000. You've unlocked the potential to now create 2 blocks of land. We've added $200,000 in value. Now, did we just make that in profit? Well, actually, no, we didn't, because we've got costs associated with that. You've got to buy the property, so you've got buying costs, holding costs, and it costs you about $20,000 for a DA. Imagine you could create $200,000 of value without ever even having to own the property itself. Now that's much better than having to buy it and having to outlay all of those costs. While being able to control the property without ever owning it, that's called options. So stage 4 is finance. Now, unless you already have a lot of cash to do property development, most people are going to need to get finance. Now, property development finance is a little bit different to traditional residential finance. Now, for some smaller property developments, you can still get residential finance. That's generally up to 3 or 4 dwellings. Now, once you're beyond 4 dwellings, you normally go into what's called commercial finance. Now, because property development is a business, you actually get commercial finance, not necessarily for a commercial property, but for a commercial use, even if it's residential property. Does that make sense? This was my first ever property development, and I did it using vendor finance. I ended up purchasing this property for $1.1 million. The vendor financed it $300,000. Once I had the deposit sorted, I actually found another investor and I joint ventured with that other investor to develop the property. They put in $300,000, which enabled the development of the property through to the completion. The deal was 2 existing houses located on 2 separate blocks of land. So what we built was 3 townhouses in the backyard. This ended up in a profit of over $200,000 over the course of 2 years, and this was my very first property development deal. Step 5 is sales and marketing. There's two main ways to sell a property. One is off the plan and the other one is on completion. So stage 6 is construction. If you're going to go through and do the construction phase, you're generally going to make a lot more money. The final step is completion and settlement. This involves lodging for plan sealing with the council, which means you're able to split your titles. So what can property deal makers do? Get into property with no money. Create cash flow for life. You can make $50,000 in 6 months from now, from the day you start. You could start from as soon as today. The thing is, I used to go to seminars and a few years later, I used to see the same people. And I used to ask them, how's it going? And they used to tell me, oh, I'm still learning, I'm still going to these seminars. Well, stop going to inductory seminars and start doing something. Use the knowledge, apply the strategies. That's what I did when I first started. I applied the strategies, I just started doing it. At some point, you're going to just have to start to do it. That's how you get the results. If I had the same training, I would have cut my learning time down by at least half or more to get to where I am now. The real decision isn't whether or not you're willing to work with us or anyone else for that matter. The real decision is whether or not you're ready to increase your wealth and change your life. I really look forward to seeing you on our live coaching.